In today's shoot, we are taking inspiration from a classic horror film, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, and then we're adding our modern fashion twist. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. I get inspiration from so many different places. Sometimes it's other photographers, but very often it's from things like pop art or paintings, or even from movies. So I have to admit, recently I saw The Birds for the very first time. And of course, after being inspired, I decided I wanted to do some sort of homage to it in a fashion shoot. Now, when I shoot, I'm not usually trying to recreate the visuals from the film, but instead I take the things that I'm drawn to. It could be hair and makeup, it could be a color palette, or it could be the mood and emotion. And so today you're going to see how I take several of those elements and weave them together for my own twist on this classic horror film. I'm taking a lot of my inspiration from the iconic movie poster for this film. And so in looking at it, one of the first things that pops out is the color. It's this beautiful, like robin's egg blue. It's super saturated, both in the clothing and the background. So as you can see, the look that she is wearing here, it's not a replication of what was in the film, but it's a modern nod to that look. And then we have the background. This is actually a blue mist background that I intend to saturate a little bit more in post. And the same thing, looking at the poster, I'm not trying to replicate the hairstyle, but we're giving a nod to that look that Tippi Hedren was wearing in the film. So I put beautiful things in front of my camera to start off with, but they're not a replication, instead just a reference or inspiration of. I think already, if I didn't do any creative lighting or very much post-processing, you could probably still tell what I was trying to reference in the image, but I want to really sell it hard and do something a little bit more unique. So what we're going to do is I'm going to build in the lighting one by one so you can see how I create a little bit of drama and dimension in my shot. In the end, we are going to be using 5 different strobes, and these are a mix of ProPhoto D2s and ProPhoto Pro D3s. Let's begin with our main light. To the left-hand side of the frame, I am choosing a hard light modifier. In the movie poster, it looks like it's really, really hard light, almost like she's being hit by sunlight, or perhaps she's on an old movie set and they're using a Fresnel. So for my set, I am using a Westcott optical spot. This is the modifier that I created in conjunction with Westcott. Now on this, I am using the 150mm lens. So this is the longer lens, usually used for beauty shots. I've chosen this because it's going to create really crisp light on her face, but also it's going to give me a lot of control. So I don't have to worry about the main light also spilling on the background. I can light the subject, the background, each of those elements separately. So let's take a look at what our first strobe is giving us. All right, so you can see that it is a concentrated area of light, almost like a spotlight, that has a definition and fall off right at the middle of her torso. And then her jawline is just carved out because it is such a hard light. So it's already beautiful, and this is kind of selling that Tippi Hedren look. All right, so now it's time to add the second strobe, and this is where the magic starts to happen. You start to get the feeling of the birds. Over on the right-hand side, you can see I've added a second strobe, and it's using another optical spot, but this time with a 50mm lens, which gives more coverage of light, so it's going to illuminate the background even more. But the magic part of the equation is the GoBo that I'm adding to the optical spot. GoBo is a go-between optic, and typically they're metal, and you can get so many different shapes and patterns. It's honestly endless. But in this case, I had a GoBo custom made for me. Specifically, it is a glass GoBo, and on it, I have the pattern of birds that I can project on the background behind her. Now, the reason that I had to have this custom made, and I actually reached out to the company Roscoe that makes so many of these GoBos. The reason I had to have it custom made is because if I had birds cut out of a typical metal GoBo, when it's cut out in the shape of a bird, that means the birds will be the light part and everything around it would be dark. But if there were shadows of the birds in the scene, they wouldn't be light, it would be a shadow. So in order to achieve that, I needed to have a glass GoBo created. So you can see that the pattern of the birds is almost printed on the glass. All right, so I've added this GoBo to our second strobe. Let's take a look at what it does to the background. What's nice about using an optical spot is because it's using a lens, I can actually focus it or defocus it, which means for those shadows on the background, for the outlines of the birds, I can make them really sharp and defined, or I can defocus it and make them a little bit softer depending on what I think looks better. We're going to start here and maybe I'll tweak it later on. So we have an optical spot as our main, an optical spot as the background light. but I want to make this look a little bit more polished. Maybe take cues from some old Hollywood films, which often had really defined rim lights and hair lights. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add 3 lights that wrap around the subject. We're going to begin with 2 rims, one on either side, and I'm using a 1x4 foot stripped softbox with a grid. This is going to give me beautiful separation on her jawline, the side of her body, her hair. And so let's take a look at what it looks like adding 2 more strobes. So far a total of 4 by adding rim lights. Those rim lights look beautiful. They add a lot of pop and dimension to the shot, but I do want to add one more. And that final light that we have is going to be hair light from above. This again is a 1x4 foot strip softbox, but this time it is boomed out over the subject's head. We are using a roller stand and a telescoping mini boom. All right, so let's see what the hair light adds to the equation. Now we have a beautiful glow to the top of her head, and it's giving me that old Hollywood glamour feel. Now we have all of the strobes. I have all 5 here. So we have a main light, a background light, 2 rims, and a hair light. But I'm looking at the image and I don't think that it's selling me that old Hollywood or Technicolor look, which means it's time to do a little bit of color grading. So I'm gonna pop over into Capture One and start playing around with the colors and see if I can get it to have a little bit more of that saturated look I was going for. All right, so first of all, there's a couple things I know I want to change, which is probably the contrast, the saturation, and the colors of the blue. So let me just begin with a little bit of that contrast. I think it gets a little bright there. Let me pump up some of that saturation so it's giving me the Technicolor look, but I just don't think the blues are matching. And in the movie poster, they're quite close. So I want to tweak it here. Obviously, I can do this later on in Photoshop, but if I can do it in raw processing, I have more flexibility over moving the colors before I get issues with banding or the color breaking apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my color editor. And with color editor, I have all of the individual colors, all the individual hues, and I can go in and tweak them. So for example, I can go into this blue and I can move it perhaps more towards cyan. And so you can kind of see that blue was what you can see in her clothing. So I'm going to move it more towards the cyan, and then maybe I'll saturate a little bit, maybe darken it down a tiny bit. Okay, now let's go over to this cyan. I want to move it away from the green, which is what you see on the left-hand side, and kind of what I think the background is looking like now, a little bit too seafoam. And I'm going to move it more in the direction of blue cyan. So just take a look right here. I have gotten the colors closer already. I'm going to saturate those blues, darken them down a little bit, so before and after. I think that would be good, even if that's all I shot. I might want to do a little bit more tweaking, so maybe I'll add a little bit of clarity, and then let's play around with the highlights. Now I could do 2 things. In the highlights, I could warm them up and really lean into that super saturated color of skin that you see in Technicolor. Or I could go the opposite and I could go for a little bit of cyan in the very highlights, which I think I'm liking because it is unifying the color palette. So really it's just the midtones in her skin that are warm and everything else is cool. I'm gonna pop up my saturation a little bit more, maybe darken it down a little bit. Yeah, like I think that's looking pretty close to what I'm going for. So here's before, and here's after. And of course, I'm shooting raw, I'm shooting tethered, I'm adjusting the raw. I can always change my mind after the fact. The reason that I like to shoot tethered and the reason I like to do my color grading as I'm shooting is because I can see if I'm capturing what I need to for the end product. Plus, my creative team, hair, makeup, wardrobe, they can actually see the images as we're shooting and make tweaks in order to improve the image. So I like the color that we're working with, the background, the styling, the lighting, like it is really all coming together, but I think it might be interesting to add some elements of depth or maybe some props. So I went online and bought these fake crows. These are not taxidermy, they're fake. So we are going to be able to use that maybe to cast a shadow on the subject's face, or maybe put it in the foreground or the background, something like that, just to add another level of interest and just a little something to play with. Now, props are one thing, but then I'm also going to have to rely on my subject to give me a little bit of emotion. I think for this image, if she's just kind of sitting there looking pretty, it's not selling the birds. I need a little drama, a little bit of mystery coming through in her expression. I think that's what will really sell the image. The last thing I want to talk about is a technical consideration. I'm going to be shooting with the Canon R5 and the Canon 24 to 105 2.8 lens. This is my go-to combo. This lens is gorgeous because it's sharp. It gives me a lot of flexibility for my focal length, but it's really important for this shot, for the way that I want to capture this. I'm actually shooting at 2.8. I am shooting wide open so that I can soften the detail in the background a little bit. I can have a little bit narrower depth of field. I think that's going to make it look a little bit more cinematic. Furthermore, I'm going to set my camera to face and eye tracking, so it's finding the face, the eye closest to camera, and locking focus there to make sure that even though I'm shooting wide open, I'm still going to have nice tack sharp images. All right, beautiful lighting, beautiful subject, interesting props. I have all the elements, so now let's work on those expressions. All right, so there is our fashion shoot inspired by classic horror, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. One of the reasons that I like to go back and visit elements from the past is not just because it gives me more ideas, but also it rewards the viewer who perhaps has seen this film and they go, oh, I know what the reference is. So it adds even more layer of interest and engagement with those appreciating your photographs. Now, if you'd like to see the gear used to make these images, be sure to check out the links in the description below and of course, visit Adorama.com. Now, if you'd like to learn more from me, definitely recommend you check out Learn with Lindsay. At learnwithlindsay.com, you can see my workshops, my tutorials, and I even have a timeless workshop that has been recorded based on inspiration from painting. So that may be of interest to you as well. All right, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you want to see more like this, be sure to like and subscribe. See you next time.